I think that most of you are aware that tomorrow happens to be Veterans Day, and we have been telling you the last several days on the air that Town Square Media, which owns our four radio stations here, and I just wrapped my microphone. That's been bad habit lately. I keep bumping into it, and you might hear the rattling out there. That's not my joints, by the way, although it could be, but it's not. But we've been telling you the last several days about how our four radio stations here in Twin Falls are looking to provide for a needy military family at Christmas. We call it Town Square Cares. And if you go to our website, News Radio 1310 KLIX, Benito tells me there's a story up there, a link that you can see. You click on that, tells you how to donate to this cause. And what we're going to do in a few more days is we're going to start thinking about actually getting some nominations for a family. I'd like to actually thank Anna Workman from out in Rupert, who, of course, many of you know. Her son gave his last full measure of devotion for this country, but she's still very close to many of the people that he served with. And Anna said that there's going to be a number of nominations coming from some of the reserve and guard units, and I think that's a wonderful thing. All the better. I think that's great that we do that. But in about a week, we'll start taking those actual nominations. But the donations we're looking for now for the program, and then, as I say, in a week, we look to start taking nominations for people. And you got to keep in mind, too, a lot of people get this confused. Memorial Day is the day we set aside for those who didn't come home. Veterans Day is the day we set aside for those who served and did come home. And there's an important distinction to be made there. But the veterans you'll still see on the streets today. The others who didn't make it home, obviously, you'll find in the cemeteries. When I was a boy, we always had Veterans Day off, and I was talking with one of my coworkers, just last week, Julie Pizarro, and Julie's born on November 11th, but she told me that as a kid, she never actually had the day off from school, but she said that where her father worked, he had the day off. So on her birthday, her dad would be home preparing for her birthday party while she was at school. But when I was growing up as a kid, Veterans Day, everything was pretty well shut down. There was very little that happened, and sometimes there would be parades, but it was a moment where you would stand back, and if you saw somebody on the street and you knew they were a veteran, you could offer some thanks to them. I hope that we never forget that, and that continues. I think we've gotten much better about that in this country since 40 years ago. We seem to have realized that some people made some great mistakes. People were coming home from war in Southeast Asia, many of whom had been drafted. Their choices were, and let's face it, in a lot of families, going to Canada was no choice whatsoever. You were an American, and dang it, you were going to go, put on the uniform for your country. And that was how a lot of people in my neighborhood were. No one would have ever contemplated skipping the country in a situation like that. 10 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 35. The other day I saw this story, and maybe some of you have caught up with this, on an entirely different matter. To offer something completely different. You may have caught this story. Starbucks, which is one of the nation's biggest coffee chains, they don't even have waitresses and waiters, although I guess waitress is now considered offensive to the American left, so everyone is just wait staff. They have baristas. Yeah, okay. In other words, somebody waits on you when you want coffee. Call them whatever you like. Very popular stop for a great many people. I remember driving through Washington, D.C. a few years ago, and a friend of mine and I, she and I drove over to eat at a restaurant we liked there called the Dubliner, and we decided to go down to the White House first, and they put out all the Christmas trees from every state in the United States and also all of the territories. And we went down to take a look at and they have the national tree down there, and we drove down there and we were looking around. But on our way, we were going down some of the streets through the city. Every office building had its own Starbucks, block after block after block. So you would be driving down and you'd come to one cross street, one intersection, and you'd see a Starbucks in an office tower. Then you'd go a block down the street and there'd be another Starbucks in an office tower. Starbucks is everywhere, it seems now, and I have a little girl. Well, all right, I still call her a little girl, but I remember we went to Annapolis one time, and they had all of these great independent restaurants all over downtown by the main harbor, and all she wanted to do was go to Starbucks. It was like, you can find one of those anywhere. Starbucks has decided that they're not going to do any Christmas logos this year on its cups. Starbucks has also decided nobody's going to say Merry Christmas. I guess if you say Merry Christmas yourself to the staff, they may thank you, which is perfectly fine. I don't sweat that, that I don't think that people have to say Merry Christmas to me when I'm at the checkout. Not really. I don't walk out of there and say, that cashier did not say. And even if people say happy holidays, I don't get all that bent out of shape by it. But I do understand that there are sometimes people in this country in business who are leery of having anyone say Merry Christmas. There was some Muslim imam last week who made some public statement that saying Merry Christmas to a Muslim in this country was the equivalent of murder. Yeah, that guy's, the elevator doesn't go to the top floor, not the sharpest tool in the shed. But you've got people in business who are trying not to offend anyone, so they're being told, don't say it. One Idaho resident by the name, and he's written about this extensively over the years, some of you may know him, Bueller. Yes, that guy. He has written extensively about this, and he's from a Jewish family. He said, I love hearing Merry Christmas. Doesn't bother me at all. I think it's a wonderful time of year. But right now, Starbucks says, well, it will have a green cup it will issue, and it might have a red top, or it's a red cup with a green top. In other words, colors that we often associate with Christmas. I don't know how that ever came about. But there's not going to be anything on the cup that would say Merry Christmas. And certainly not Jesus is the reason for the season. That's just not going to happen. And some people are really bent out of shape about this across the country. It's a corporate edict. Now, if someone themselves makes the decision not to wish me a Merry Christmas, I'm not, at all, as I say, at all upset about that. But the fact that corporate America is trying not to offend anybody by offending 90% of the public who actually still celebrates Christmas, it's beyond me. And yet, it's Starbucks' decision. We can't, and somebody made a comment about that on Facebook the other day. Hey, if it's their decision, you don't have to, go there. That's true. I'm a Maxwell House drinker. Nothing against Starbucks, but I drink for caffeine. I don't drink necessarily for taste. So I can go to the grocery store, and sometimes I go buy the store brand. That's all I really care about is a nice hot cup of coffee. I don't have any sweeteners in it. I don't have any creamers in it. I just drink my coffee black and hot, and that's it. And I don't care what the brand is, and so I'm not a Starbucks guy. But Donald Trump got a great reaction on this subject. He was at a rally yesterday, and he brought this up. And listen to what happens in the tail end of this sound clip.
Starbucks is taking Merry Christmas off. No more Merry Christmas. I will tell you, lots of big things, lots of little things. You can call this anything you want. But if I become president, we're all going to be saying Merry Christmas again. That I can tell you.
Now, the White House has a tree that they still light up. I mentioned I've been there and I've seen it. Do they still call it the White House Christmas tree, or is it now, does Mr. Obama call it the Eid tree, or is it the Ramadan tree, or is it just, a big pine tree out there, and Michelle and the children and I are going to go out and turn on the lights? When I was a little boy, I think I was in the 3rd grade, my dad had a cousin by the name of Father Benjamin Kuhn. Father Ben, well, his real name was John Kuhn, but when he was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest, and then he ended up founding Siena College, took the name Benjamin because one of my grandmother's aunts had run a mission hospital in India for 40 years. So he took the name Benjamin instead of John, and in honor of what she had done. He actually was invited. He did the prayers at the White House Christmas tree lighting. President Nixon had him there. And so we actually, before cable, we got to see it on local TV because he was a local guy. Somebody decided to pick up the feed of all of this, and we got to watch it. I was so excited in the 3rd grade to see one of my relatives there on stage with the president, and it was the nation's Christmas tree. It was not the holiday tree. It was not a big old pine tree. It was not the conifer tree. It was the nation's Christmas tree. And the next day I got to go to school, and I went in and I told Mrs. Boyd, my teacher, about it. And you know what? She had me come up to the front of the room, and I got to tell everyone the story about how my dad's cousin had been there with the President of the United States in lighting the nation's Christmas tree. It was a hugely important moment in my life. And then later in the day, we all got to take some time during recess to decorate the tree in our room. You would take the construction paper and you would make the chains out of construction paper, and then they would get out the styrofoam popcorn and you would string that all over the tree. And, it didn't ever look quite as good as the tree we had at home, but, it was all handmade, homemade stuff, and the teachers would teach us how to do it. And at the end of the December, when we'd go out on our Christmas break, not our winter break, it'd be funny because you'd drive by the school and you'd see these piles of Christmas trees because they didn't want to leave them dry in school for the 1 to 2 weeks that you were away. So the teachers would take the decorations off and they would take all the trees out and they'd be in a big pile outside. People who didn't have trees could actually come by and pick one up for free. But that's the way life was at the time. Now, I realize that there are people in this country who are Hindu, who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Zoroastrian, who are atheists and the like. But the fact of the matter is, the tree isn't biblical. Let's be honest about that. It's just a symbol of life, evergreen. It lives through the winter. The symbolism of that part of it. But I am just sick to death of people telling me you can't have a nativity scene at the town square. You cannot have a tree and call it a Christmas tree. I don't think schools do it any longer either, because I think that they're so worried and afraid that some devious atheist from the ACLU is going to show up here in southern Idaho from New York City and say, aha, I must stop you because it hurts my feelings 2,500 miles away. It's time we just simply learn to say no. And you know what? If they say, well, we're going to take you to court. All right. And if the court rules against us, we're going to say no. What are they going to do? Arrest us for putting up a Christmas tree? And if they do, all right, we'll go to jail. Maybe we can set up our own trees in our cells. We've got to realize that ultimately we have the numbers still. And if they want to put 10,000 of us away, because, well, they'll fine you. They won't put you in jail. Well, we won't pay the fine. Once they put 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, a million away in jail for putting up a Christmas tree and for having a nativity scene in the town square, I really think public opinion will change rather dramatically on all of this. And I look forward to the day that we can get together and not all realize that we're out there alone, hanging on the edge by ourselves, and realize that if we would just stay together, that there is strength in those numbers. But we can tell the politically correct, the jackasses in mainstream media, the academics, and the anti-Christian licentious union known as the ACLU, that they can go straight to the nether reaches, which is, by the way, where they're going. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Short break. More coming up, including, if you're so inclined, some of your telephone calls. 34. I thought it was going to get warmer today. Well, it's supposed to. We'll have to see. Oh, gee, all Star Wars music today. I guess that's somewhat appropriate because there's a new Star Wars movie coming out. I have about as much interest in going to go see that as I do, I don't know, watching paint dry. I have an email. Thank you, Michael. He says, you drink your coffee non-white. He says, get politically correct. Says I'm a racist. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number is 736-0300. I do want to remind you about our friends at Tint Lady of Idaho. A Tint Lady, of course, will do a free estimate when it comes to window tints for your home, your office, your automobile. This time of year, maybe it's not so much the heat convection coming through the windows, but it's the ultraviolet light that can be a bleaching agent on a great many of your valuables and your furniture and the like in your home. So we recommend that you get in touch with them for that free estimate. And eventually, these tints are going to pay for themselves. Telephone number 736-8469 or online, tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated, nearly a quarter century in business over at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only, closed Sundays. And remember, don't squint, get tint. We have a telephone caller with us. It's coming up on 9:23, 36 now. Hey, we jumped a couple of degrees. I'm happy to say that. And you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. There's a couple things. One, I love what Rush says, that the colleges are getting what they reap, because for years they've taught these kids how to manipulate and everything else in a liberal fashion, and now it's happening within the schools themselves against the teachers that taught them, which I think is awesome. I think the next thing is that when people try to get dragged into court for saying Merry Christmas or putting up a Christmas tree because they're offended, then we should countersue and say we're offended because of how you feel against us. It's a two-way street. If someone's offended, then someone else on the other side offended also. So
Well,
how does that turn into a court case?
as I mentioned off the top of the show, you've got Lefty all bent out of shape. His nose is out of joint because Muslims in New Jersey can't get the Eid holiday off with 6 days' notice, and they're now all making threats that when we outnumber you, we'll force you to do it. And yet, Lefty says, well, we shouldn't celebrate Christmas or make any mention of it. I'm sorry, but which one is it?
Well, here we go with people coming into our country and not assimilating. They're not assimilating. They're trying to change it. And we need to take it back. And they either assimilate, or instead of paying welfare for them, we buy them a ticket out of here.
Yeah.
And send them to some place that fits what they want.
I don't think we'll be able to do it on one of those crowdsourcing websites, though, because they anything that isn't liberal and politically correct, they don't bother to. They usually knock it out in a day or so.
Well, these guys got to watch out too. That person made a threat in the middle of a classroom. Nothing happened. Could you imagine if a conservative made that exact same threat?
Oh yeah. Well,
Except, what's going to happen is I don't know, like that small town here. When it gets to that point that they start making threats, I feel sorry for them because I think retaliation will come swift hard.
Yeah, I thank you much for the call, and that's what's happening in Europe. You've got people who are suddenly making threats and making demands, and in places in Europe that people thought would forever be, these leftist paradises, you're seeing the rise of these new right-wing parties, and some of them, the rhetoric is reminiscent of what you heard in the 1930s. So people are bringing it on themselves, and what it is the public doesn't necessarily agree with the idea that some of these parties espouse. Not completely, but the public says, wait a minute. Angela Merkel there says that I have to give up everything I have and, end up being converted or killed because these people are here. Or, this guy over here says to me, I'll help push them out of the country. Well, I want them out of the country. Therefore, Angela no longer gets my vote. He does. And I think we're going to see something like that in this country develop. I think we are. I think that the reaction to Trump and Carson is a great sign of that happening. 926, you're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And what's on your mind?
Morning, Bill. I was one of those draftees you were talking about earlier.
Oh, hey. Well, congratulations on coming home safe and alive, and I hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow.
Let me tell the rest of the story. I went to Canada after I got back from Vietnam.
After?
I was wearing my dress greens. I went on the train from Vancouver to Winnipeg. There wasn't one person on that train that knew what uniform I was or what country I was from. They would come and ask you, well, what country are you from? What country are you from? I said, this is United States to the south. Oh, all we see is your draft dodgers. Believe it or not, I hardly bought any drinks or any meals on that trip from Vancouver to Winnipeg.
Well, once you get out of Vancouver, from Vancouver pretty much to London, Ontario, it's a very conservative country. The problem is Vancouver is like San Francisco, and then once you get to Toronto and east, it turns into like a socialist republic. But Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, those are all good people.
We lived in Alberta for 2 years, and it was beautiful country and beautiful people. But we have a common enemy up there, the weather.
Yes. I had a friend who lived in Lethbridge for many, many years.
Oh, yes.
And,
we were halfway between Edmonton and Winnipeg.
Edmonton
and
Well, it was
Lloyd Minister.
Yeah, his father was in the oil business, and so they learned what it was like to be mightily cold.
Yeah, definitely. They all left Edmonton to bury my father. It was 48 below.
Oh, gee. Yeah, I've been in weather once where it was 46 below, and I never want to do that again.
Yeah. Well, God bless. Enjoy the show.
Hey, thank you much for your service, sir, and thank you for the telephone call. That's a great story. When there was talk that Quebec would secede back in, 96? I can remember I was listening to As It Happens, one of my favorite radio shows. Canada, the radio, much of it is controlled by the government, but the show itself was very, very good. I think it's still on the air. I was listening driving home from work one night, and there was a discussion, and the politicians, the leaders, political leaders, they were saying that if Quebec had seceded, that likely the rest of Canada would break apart. And they were saying that what would happen would be Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta would apply for admission into the United States. And frankly, those three provinces would fit in very well with the Midwest and the Mountain West in the United States because John Diefenbacher, who was the Prime Minister of Canada for a stretch in the 1960s, he came out of that oil patch and was one of the most conservative leaders that country ever had. Now, their pendulum has swung the other way, and, they've got second-generation hippie now in charge. But you remember a name, Joe Clark, as well, who was, I think that was his name. He was of the same political stripe. He lasted about 6 months on the job. That's one of the beauties of a parliamentary system. If you don't like what the guy's doing, you can boot him out of there in relatively swift order. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Environmentalists say you shouldn't be eating bacon because it's making the world warmer. Yeah, I guess they have the heat on too high. More details coming up.